same.
Well, I'm okay.
Are you? I'm okay.
The first finance and performance meeting of this term. We will start with apologies, and we have apologies from Councillor Hills for illness, Councillor Darby, Filipina, and Member Taipri for lateness. Any more apologies? I'd like to move those apologies. Seconded, Councillor Henderson. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. I've had no declarations of interest. No. There are no minutes to be confirmed. I've been aware of no petitions. I've been aware of no public input. There is no local board input being received, although I acknowledge that in the room we have Member Elliott from the Ōrākei Local Board. There is no items of extraordinary business. So let's start. We go straight into item 8, the disposal recommendation for 6 Clonburn Road, Remuera, and we bring to the table Letitia and Marion and Gary Jackson. Welcome, team. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Microphones, please.
The property that we are recommending for disposal today is 6 Clonburn Road in Remuera. We are seeking approval to dispose of the site for redevelopment purposes. This is subject to the provision of a minimum of 200 car parks and quality design outcomes forming part of the redevelopment of the site. 6 Clonburn Road is currently a council-owned car park. There's a 2-level concrete car park structure located on the site which provides a total of 179 car parks. The car park structure has significant structural integrity issues. In March 2019, Auckland Transport made the decision to close the upper level of the car park due to these safety issues. In 2019, the Auckland Transport Board approved the transfer of the asset to Panuku Development Auckland for redevelopment, subject to the provision of a minimum of 200 car parking spaces. This is consistent with the current Auckland Transport parking strategy, as it would maintain the number of car parks in the area while allowing for future public transport routes to be future-proofed, as signalled in the RLTP. Panuku has undertaken the property asset rationalisation process to determine if there are any impediments to the proposed divestment of 6 Clonburn Road for redevelopment purposes. The Ōrākei Local Board endorsed this proposal at its September 2019 business meeting. Subsequent to the local government elections, we've also discussed this with the new Ōrākei Local Board Chair, and he supports the proposal, and Member Elliott from the Ōrākei Local Board is here today in support of this proposal. As no current or future public work has been identified for the site, it is now recommended for disposal to enable redevelopment. Should the site be approved for sale, Panuku will progress a redevelopment at 6 Clonburn Road that will provide a minimum of 200 car parking spaces, as well as quality design outcomes within any new development. We're happy to take any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Questions, members?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Letitia. It was something that was brought up by Councillor Darby yesterday, but he won't be here at the beginning. And I had the same question around the requirement for 200 car parks, which is more than is already there. And given our climate change commitments and, increasing parking seems to be a bit odd, and I just wonder where that came from. In the report it says there's a requirement from the AT board required it, and then the local board a few months later then supported that. What is the evidence to support the need for 200?
Through the Chair, this is to enable the Remuera Town Centre to be future-proofed so that future public transport options can be enabled as set out in the RLTP.
So, excuse me, Chair, so does that mean as park and ride?
No.
So I'm not understanding how that meets any of our commitments to getting people, giving people other choices. And given that, I imagine that the catchment has got a bit of a walkability, a bit more walkability than some others. I mean, I don't go to Remuera.
The proposal is intended to be car park neutral because it will allow for future public transporting options that there may be some offsetting of car parking.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll move if you don't mind. Seeing it's in. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Member Blair.
Oh, kia ora. Just need some clarification because is the land being offered up for sale?
Through the chair, not as yet. We are seeking approval from this committee to make the land available for sale, but no negotiations have been entered into yet.
And who is the party that you're entering into the sale with?
Through you, Madam Chair, we haven't actually landed a negotiating partner yet. Our primary focus over the last couple of months was to address the health and safety issues on the site. We have received interest from adjacent landowners with respect to any integrated development on the site, but the development strategy is yet to be agreed by the Panuku board.
Okay. Would you consider, as one of those adjacent parties, the local iwi of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei for sale, to buy?
Through the chair, yes, we would, and we will be notifying all iwi groups to inform them of the decision that this committee makes today.
Okay, so it's not a direct RFR to the local foodstuffs group that'll get the first bite of the cherry. It'll be everybody else as well.
Through the chair, no, there's no RFR in place.
Thank you.
Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou. I have a question that's related to the car parking. It was two parts to the question. One is, could you just clarify what the actual zoning is? Are there minimum requirements for parking with the development? I appreciate what you've said about why the AT board made it subject to the provision of the minimum 200 car parks, but could you just clarify what the zoning requirements are about that? And also, I just wanted to highlight in terms of the climate impact statement, I appreciate that we're sort of getting underway and trying to get our heads around what that climate impact statement is all about, but it does seem a bit odd to have a disposal incorporating quite a high number of car parks without any recognition of what the climate emissions are related to that. So it has highlighted about the removing the concrete parking platform, but nothing about the activity itself. So there are two parts to that question, and the last part is about the impact statement and what further consideration was given to actually how you do some analysis around the impact.
Through the chair, first part of your question, the zoning is town centre. Second part is there is a requirement to provide 45 car parks to the adjacent New World. That's by way of licence, and that's in place until 2028. With respect to emissions, because this is intended to potentially offset car parking for future transport routes, our thinking was it was emissions neutral, but take your point, and this is the first time we've done these climate impact statements, take your point that we should have been explicit rather than implicit in that.
So just to clarify, I mean, that would be really good to have highlighted that, because that's exactly the concern about we seem to be doing something here that's really contrary to the direction that we have set. But just in terms of the zoning, just to clarify that point about the zoning, so you said that the actual requirement is only 45 car parks that's required by the zoning.
So, through the chair, no, there's a licence in place to the adjacent New World as part of its resource consent that requires council to provide 45 car parks. In respect of the number of car parks for the zoning, I don't have that information to hand, sorry.
However, if I could further clarify, there are approximately 180 car parks on that site at present. Yes, the upper deck is closed for structural integrity issues, but we believe that there still is no net new. There are no net new spaces, if you like. Therefore, no further impact on emissions. It is town centre zoning, so it depends on really what the activity is there. There's quite a wide range of activities allowed within that zoning, but car parking, I guess what we're looking at is how we replace the existing car parking within that town centre, which is in line with the Auckland Transport Parking Strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
No, Madam Chair. I had my hand up to move the item or second the item if required.
I'm happy to let you do that, councillor.
You wanted to still do it?
No.
Okay. Any other further questions? Great. Well, then I will move and Councillor Cooper will second the 3 recommendations. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 9 is the delegation for approval to release the interim and full year council group results to NZX, and we have John Bishop presenting this. Welcome, John.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Look, I'll take this report as read, but look, very briefly, this is to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Finance and Performance Committee to release the Auckland Council interim and final year.
Can you put your mic on? Thanks. And turn Letitia's off. One beside you, John. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all right.
Sorry, I'll start again. Look, good morning, everybody. I'll take the report as read, but this is simply to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Finance and Performance Committee to release the Council Group interim and full year results to the NZX, and this continues a delegation which existed in previous council terms.
Any questions for Mr Bishop? Right, thank you. I'll second. A question from Councillor Young. No? No question? Okay. No other questions? Right, then I'll move the, it's been moved by Deputy Mayor and seconded by myself. All those in favour say aye. Against? Okay. Thank you. Moving now to item 10, the council group and quarter 1 performance for 30th of September, noting that whilst we're discussing it today, really, it is the last council term's results, which is still very good, but will be even better, hopefully. So we have the finance team in front of us. We have Ross Tucker, Nicola and John Bishop. Over to you.
Yes.
Okay, good morning. So these are the quarterly results for the quarter to 30 September this financial year. So I'll talk about the group results for the quarter. Within that, there's some debt numbers and treasury stuff that I'll get John to talk about, and then hand over to Nicola to talk about the results for the council parent. So in terms of capital expenditure for the group, so it was a very solid capital progress over the quarter. So it was a quarter of strong delivery, over $500 million of capex delivered over those 3 months, and that was 130 million, or 35% more than the same quarter a year ago. So it's not 100% of budget. We never seem to get 100%, but it's 87% of the budget, which is higher than it's been historically. So within that, some of the key projects are water quality improvement projects, such as ones in Dawley Street and Freeman's Bay, which includes things that will support the America's Cup. It includes water quality projects at Kaho Bay to significantly improve water quality there. Includes significant progress with the downtown program. It's key street strengthening and the initial work on the Ferry Basin redevelopment. Other projects that have been ramping up was water cares projects, both the Northern Interceptor and the Central Interceptor are gearing up, and also significant further progress with the Eastern Busway over the period. So in terms of capex, ones that are a little bit delayed, some of the Panuku projects, some of their Unlock Transforms are a little bit behind schedule. In terms of operating performance, very good numbers, 36 million favourable to budget for the group. So it's largely driven by higher revenue. That's predominantly higher revenue in the regulatory space due to higher building resource consent volumes. and also in water care, particularly the infrastructure growth charges due to development occurring and just the water care's revenue generally. Direct expenditure, 4 million, slightly ahead of budget, largely timing differences at this stage. So looking at FTEs for the group, so across the group between 30 June and 30 September, total FTEs for the group increased by 193 people. The bulk of that was within Auckland Council at 135. I'll let Nicola talk about that in a minute, but it was predominantly across, the increase was across a bunch of frontline facing services, so it's customer service, community, streetscapes, graffiti removal, a whole range of things like that, and one area in particular that remains a focus for FTEs and recruitment is the regulatory area, and so Nicola will focus in on that in particular. So just moving across to debt, I'll just start and hand over to John. So net debt as at 30 September was 9.1 billion, quite favourable in terms of the debt to total assets. So compared to the size of the council's asset base, it was small, but it was in the sense of the ratio of debt to revenue, it was elevated as at 30 September at 263%, so very close to our internal limit of 265. But that is just a temporary blip. So as John will explain, we expect that to come down by the end of the financial year. And I'll turn over to John to explain how that works.
Which one is it?
That one forward here.
Okay, thank you, Ross. So this slide just explains why we see an increase in the debt to revenue ratio at the end of September. The key reason here is because our debt to revenue looks at gross debt and not net debt, so it doesn't net off cash balances. So if you look at our situation as at the end of the last financial year, we had gross debt of roughly $9 billion, represented by that light blue bar there. In the first quarter of this financial year, we have raised about $1.4 billion worth of debt, principally through a large euro benchmark transaction and also through our second domestic green bond. So that's raised proceeds which have elevated our gross debt as at 30 September. Now those proceeds are currently sitting in cash, represented by that green bar, and they'll be used over the course of the next 4 to 5 months to pay down maturing debt of about $1 billion and also fund some of our capex. So as a result, once we get to the end of the financial year, we'll expect our gross debt to be back on budget around about 9.6 billion and debt to revenue to be correspondingly lower. Now if I take you to the next slide, now this is a new slide in the reporting pack. It's designed to give greater insight into Treasury and how we manage our debt and our interest rate exposure. So I'll go through each piece of information on this slide, explain what it is and why it's important. So we start at the top left there, under key metrics. The first thing says no breaches in Treasury management policy, which is a green tick. Now the Treasury management policy is the high-level document of our Treasury policies, which is approved by this committee at least once every 3 years. So that confirms we're in compliance with all our debt, interest rate, counterparty and foreign exchange policies. Next piece of information is to do with LGFA covenants. Now they're contained in the underlying shareholders agreement that we have with the local government funding agency, and that just confirms we're in compliance with those covenants, and they're around things like our debt to revenue level and our concentration of our debt with the LGFA. The next slide confirms our credit ratings at AA and AA2 from Moody's. And for those new councillors, they're equivalent ratings, just different terminology from S&P and Moody's. And they've both been reaffirmed over the last 3 months. Now those strong credit ratings, one notch below the government and the local government funding agency, They're a notch higher than the main domestic banks, ANZ, Westpac and the like, and they're considerably higher than other corporate entities such as, say, Fonterra and the generators and electricity retailers. Now, why the credit rating is important, or why a strong credit rating is important, it allows us to borrow more cheaply, allows us to borrow for longer periods of time, allows us to borrow from a wider range of debt capital markets around the world, and allows us to borrow without significant clauses or restrictions in the borrowing documentation. Now, the next piece of information looks at our average term to maturity of our debt, which you see is currently 5.6 years, and typically that will run at about between 5 and 7 years. And again, that's a very important factor which helps our credit rating. We don't want to see all our debt maturing in the short term, so the next 1 to 2 years. And in fact, we have maturing debt at the moment out as far as 2034. Now, that gross cost of funds is a snapshot of our current cost of funds at the end of September. You see at 4.66%. That'll translate into an annual interest expense of around about 450 million based on current debt levels. Next piece of information is the forecast borrowing requirements over the next 12 months. You see there at 1.24 billion. Look, it sounds like a big number, and in some ways it is. But look, going forward, as council's debt reaches about 10 billion or higher, that figure on an annual basis will be around about 1.5 billion each year, or maybe slightly higher. Now, it is a big number, but if you put it in context of, say, our recent euro issuance, we could have raised in that one transaction at least 2 billion New Zealand dollars at that closing price we achieved. So it is a big number, but given our strong rating, we do have access to capital markets, which allows us to borrow those size of funds relatively easily. Now, the next line shows what's known as our backup facilities in cash, and again, that's a very important factor in our rating. What those backup facilities are, they're committed lines we have with 10 relationship banks, and they allow us to access funds in case the global capital markets shut down, like you saw with the global financial crisis. So what we do is we make sure that the amount of cash we have on hand, plus the level of backup facilities, exceeds what we need to borrow in any 6-month period. And again, that's a very important factor behind our AA rating. Now, the next number shows the mark-to-market of our interest rate swap portfolio. Now, put very simply, that's saying, theoretically, if on one day we could put in all the interest rate hedging or swaps that we have in place currently, and they extend out to 15 years, as is shown by that bottom chart on the left-hand side, which I'll explain in more detail later, we could do it based on rates at 30 September, $2.2 billion cheaper than we currently have in place. Now, that's a theoretical concept because we couldn't put it all in place in one day. The other important points there is it's non-cash, very much like you see in our accounts when you see property revaluations or devaluations. And if we hold these swaps or interest rate hedges to maturity, they will unwind. So essentially they'll reverse and end up being back at zero. So during the life of the swap, on day one it has a mark-to-market value of 0. On the last day it has a mark-to-market value of 0, but they will oscillate as interest rates change. And again, given the size of our debt and interest rate portfolio, we can easily see swings of $50 million in a day. So we focus maybe now on the top right-hand chart there, the borrowing sources. Again, having diversity in our borrowing sources is a key element of why we have such a strong rating. You see right now we're split just under 50% of foreign currency borrowings. And just again for new councillors, all foreign currency borrowings, we do hedge those back into New Zealand dollars. We have about 25% with the local government funding agency, just under 25% of New Zealand dollar vanilla bonds, and we have a small portion there of, in green, of New Zealand dollar green bonds. And again, what are green bonds? They're just like a normal bond, except the proceeds are used for sustainability objectives. In the case of our 2 issuances to date, they've been used to refinance electric trains and cycleways. And you'll see that portion of green bonds as we go forward grow. So you'll see a greater portion of our issuance, both domestically and offshore, is likely to be in a green format. We focus now on the bottom left-hand chart, the fixed to floating rate interest rate cover. So what this shows is broken down by financial year, the amount of fixed rate cover that we have in place. So to go through this chart, the top blue line is our forecast debt level. And you see that flat line's at about 14 billion at the end of our long-term planning period. The top red dotted line is our maximum amount of fixed rate debt we can have in place under our Treasury policy. The bottom red dotted line there is the minimum amount of cover we have in place, and the dark blue shading is the amount of fixed rate cover we actually have in place as at 30 September. So you can see in the short to medium term, it's slightly above the midpoint, falling away to below the midpoint of a policy out beyond 7-8 years. So the dark blue is the fixed rate cover. Obviously that means that the light blue is the amount of floating rate exposure we have. Now what makes up that fixed rate exposure? It's essentially what's known as those interest rate swaps. We have about 180 different swaps in place, and they'll date back to as far as 2012. And we'll add to that portfolio over time as you look to lock in those cost of funds. Now why do we hedge our debt? It's simply to give us certainty over our interest costs, which helps us deliver our CapEx program, so we know we can do that within our debt constraints. Now what would happen if we don't hedge? To give you a simple example, as debt approaches $10 billion, if we were 100% at floating rates, so that all that graph was in the light blue, a 1% increase in interest rates would lead to $100 million of extra interest costs in any financial year. And to fund that, we will need to increase rates by roughly 6% just to cover that shortfall. So that's why we do hedge our interest rate exposure, and we're especially focused on hedging out sort of 3 to 5 years. Now the last chart on the right hand side shows the forecast cost of borrowings. So the top blue line there was the forecast cost of borrowings in the annual plan from the previous year. The dark blue line there is the forecast cost of funds that we expect will occur over the remaining 9 years of our long-term plan as at 30 September. Now the reason why it is lower than the annual plan is two reasons. One is simply we're in a lower interest rate environment, and the second point is we have taken advantage of that lower interest rate environment to lock in more hedging, as you see by that dark blue shaded area, and that's given us more certainty about our interest costs going forward and more confidence that our cost of funds will be lower than what we projected in the annual plan. Should we?
We'll stop here for questions.
Okay, we'll just stop here for questions. Just before we go into questions, I just sort of want to help a bit of the translation. So even though our debt has gone up, it's not a bad thing, because although, just like money being cheap in New Zealand, we have taken the opportunity to borrow at a good time, and we don't, like, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, you don't get your money all from the same place. So we've gone offshore and we've got all that. We have done, we're up 35% on this time last year of what we're actually delivering. We're $500 million in 3 months of capital works we're doing. So we're doing some big stuff, and you borrow to build, all right? So it's a temporary elevation, taking advantage of the markets, for want of a better word, but open to questions. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thank you for the report. I just wanted to ask a dumb question. So we've spent 502 million. That's 130 million compared to last year. Is that a good thing that we spent 130 million more, or did that mean that the costs went up? I was just trying to find an explanation, because the key budget variance here is probably in relation to the 72 million variance, not the difference here.
Yeah, the number has gone up because we've delivered more capital expenditure. So when we signed off the 10-year budget, there's a significant ramp up in capital expenditure compared to previous years. So in the past, the council's spent as a group $1.7 billion per annum, and the 10-year budget has that increasing to $2.7 billion per annum. So the 10-year budget includes a significant step up in delivery of capital expenditure, and you're starting to see that come through in the actual results.
So we're delivering more, councillor. We're doing more for Aucklanders, okay? Building more, doing stuff, okay? Councillor Coon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the presentation. It was very clear. I just have two questions, if I may. The first one is around the FTEs, which is, I understand, quite a blunt indicator of performance. And I just wondered if you could highlight where I could find more information about how we actually measure performance based against those FTEs, which I would have thought would be a better way of looking at whether we've got the right level of FTEs.
We're looking at that at the moment.
Well, I guess we would say that the report, there's a lot of material in the report that covers performance. So if you look at the results against the performance targets, if you look at the delivery of the capital program, if you look at the highlights achieved, you'll see lots of performance information there. I guess we don't sort of, through the quarterly reporting through to the committee, we don't highlight the performance of individual staff or departments. We focus on the outputs that have been delivered by the group, by the parent, and then through the CCO committee by the CCO. So it's at the aggregated level. It's how are we tracking against the things we said we'd do in our 10-year budget and annual plan. So I guess that's how we think about it.
Productivity would be measured against the outputs.
Yes, so we'll be looking at
department by
what outputs are we achieving, how much money have we spent, and that's the best way to look at performance.
Thank you. Matt, a second. You mentioned, John, that for the green bonds, they've been used to refinance the electric chains and cycleways. I was curious to know, how do you refinance cycleways? Do you mean we've raised funds for that capital investment?
Through you, Chairs, that's basically what it is. So it's to, finance new expenditure on cycleways and things like that, and will fund new expenditure on electric trains, and it has been used in the past to refinance some of our expenditure on existing trains as previous debt has matured.
Right, so we thought, the investment was going to come from a different source, but we've now targeted it to the green bonds.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So it was always going to come through debt as a source, but we, rather than doing, I guess, normal vanilla bonds, we have chosen to issue the green bonds which link our debt to those sustainable outcomes.
Sustainable source for a sustainable output.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Member Blair.
Oh, kia ora, thank you for the presentation. Just wanted to understand, you mentioned that development contributions were up, but in the report they're down. Was there something around that? Because the developers are taking advantage of delays or something like that?
Yeah, so the big increase is in water care. So the water care uses infrastructure growth charges. They work differently to development contributions. So with development contributions, which we charged by the council and fund transport, community, stormwater infrastructure, there's a new policy that's been put in place, and it's the DC policy that has some different timing changes, and that doesn't apply to the infrastructure growth charges applied by water care.
But because of that policy, we receive our money later from the developers, is that right?
That is correct. That shows up in the pack under capital revenue, whereas water care's charges and fees all flow through to operating revenue. So you'll see that in a different part of the pack.
We're just trying to understand the asset value of Auckland Council too. Is that in a different report in terms of what asset to debt? What's our asset value at the moment?
Does he mean on the parent?
Just through you, Chair, I mean, our asset value on the books at the moment is around about 53 billion, and debt's around 9 billion, so that ratio is around about 16%.
All right. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Bond markets have been dropping for 11, 12 years solid on a steady trajectory, and we've got Germany and Japan both in the negative. How is that going to affect us and our ability to borrow with that market being still there but contracting because people are getting negative returns on their equity?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Look, it does have an impact on us. Investors would still like to earn a positive yield. So, for example, when we issued the Euro bond, which was a 10-year bond, that coupon was 0.125%. And obviously, we swapped that back to New Zealand dollars, so we don't get quite that impact. But certainly, investors do still want to earn a positive return, so it'd be more difficult for us in those markets to do a shorter term bond, say a 5-year bond, because the coupon in our credit rating would probably be negative.
Okay. All right. Okay. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you for the presentation and looking at the performance summary. That's been really helpful. My question is more speculative, in that if we're looking out into the 10 years ahead of us, and for us as policymakers, what advice would you give us where there are lots of projects being considered, not the least being the light rail issue, where the government is looking at decisions in and around that? What would the impact of operational expense, even though we might not be responsible for the capital expenditure on that? What analysis are our senior financial officers giving on what the ramifications of that potentially might be looking forward? Or is that an inappropriate question for today? I'm really genuinely interested at what role we can play in terms of making the right policy decisions and what the impact on budgets might be projecting forward.
So through the chair, I'll go a bit technical for a minute and maybe ask Ross a question, but technically what we would do is where we know that we're going to have ownership of an asset of an enduring nature over a multi-year period, then we will factor the year-by-year operating cost of that asset into our books, into our plans, into our LTP, into our infrastructure strategy. Light rail is kind of somewhere near the start. It's not clear where ownership of that infrastructure might sit. So as it stands today, and it's clearly very, very early days, as a team, we're not at a position where we would even start that work, because I don't think those discussions around ownership are currently on the table. There are discussions about what the project might look like and how you get it underway, but we've certainly not been involved in any discussions around ownership.
I appreciate your candid response, but I think it's just one of those issues that we need to be constantly monitoring, because it would have a very large impact going into the future, depending on where it finally lands.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. As we go into through the chair, 22-23, do you think there will be a recommendation to us to raise our internal debt ceiling?
Thank you. No is the answer. Sorry.
Look, I may be repeating, and through the chair, I mean, our role is to give advice, and we'll give the advice with as much clarity as we can around alternative impacts. I think staff advice in recent years around the debt ceiling setting has been good advice, and when we discuss that more, what we talk a lot about is, what you do in a rainy day. When things go on for Auckland, and we're starting to talk a bit more around climate, which brings water, which brings inundation, and inundation, I haven't got the right word, that word. Our ability to rely on our very strong credit rating and raise large amounts of money in a short period of time, we think is of a lot of value to the city and to the organisation. So I think you should expect that if we were to bring fresh advice on what appropriate debt settings are going into the new LTP, you would hear a lot from us on that trade-off between credit quality and your ability to do things and respond in a rainy day where there are questions around the quality of the insurance industry. So it's important that we're able to contribute in those kind of events. But I think, as I indicated in a workshop a week or so ago, those settings are your policies. So I do think we owe it to you to explore them, and that is your right, and you should engage in that. But we will make clear impacts of one pathway versus another. And as it stands today, we're not sitting here feeling like there's direction that they need to be reset.
Councillor Walker.
A general question on presentation. Essentially, we've got a bunch of documentation here that's all evidence-based, and I don't have any query around that. And quite obviously, we've got information in here that goes to things like Ports of Auckland and other parts of our operation. And the reason I raise this is it's very clear to me that there's a lot of other information out there that we're dealing with that I would suggest is not evidence-based. So we've got a facility on our website to communicate this information. I would suggest that that there's additional information that we need to look at that is also evidence-based, that we communicate, that digs down into things somewhat more, so that the public and, frankly, New Zealand as a whole can go to our website and recognise that there is a variety of information that is applicable, and that people wanting to make commentary around whatever have got a very good information source. So by way, this is a commendation to the officers, but it's also a recognition that in the environment that we live in, perhaps there's an onus on us to even lift our game in terms of the nature and the scope of the evidence that we're putting out. And I'd invite a comment from the officers around that, or perhaps Matthew.
Well, I'll start if that's all right, because you've spoken to me about this, and I'm certainly keen to get some transparency around that and put more available on our website. And of course, it's a political direction, and staff will follow. But if you want to give a comment, Matthew?
Just through the chair, I mean, I just support the sentiments. I think it's good that we can get as much good quality information out there as we can, and we'll continue to do that.
Well, the other comment I'd make, Madam Chair, is especially in areas where there are structural changes occurring, and for example, I'd suggest that that is the case in the area of waste, where the bottom has fallen out of recycling, for example, and yes, there are some comments here, but arguably we could and should be communicating more evidence-based information there, because there's significant change occurring. And arguably that could also be the case in other areas where the public is going to be taking more interest in our activities. That could be around Ports of Auckland, for example. It could be around some transport issues. So just make that suggestion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so we've done the overall kind of group, and we know we'll go deep dive into that later. I've got a question from Councillor Neva, sorry. Are you in the deep? Well, the deep dive will come in under the CCO oversight of the group. So we're going to move now into Auckland Council performance, the parent, for the 3 months period. And I'll take Nicola. Yeah. Okay. So we'll wait. Yep. Okay. So can we just let the officers introduce first, and then we'll take you, Nicola. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou. So Auckland Council performance. Tried to summarise that on one slide for you. The capital performance for the parent has been very strong in the first quarter, consistent with the rest of the group, as Ross described earlier. We are 40% up on delivery and compared to the first quarter last year, so very pleasing. Particularly Healthy Waters has progressed with a lot of projects. A lot is going on in the city centre, but also in other areas such as Takanini. One of the other things that kicked off in the quarter was the Otahuhu Town Centre redevelopment. In terms of some non-financial highlights, so we launched the My Auckland
site. This is a place where you can go and manage your rates accounts. I hope that some of you have logged on and had a look at it. You can look at your payments, your balance and so forth, and the idea is that that will be expanded to cover a different range of services over time. It's already bringing some benefits in terms of a decline in calls to the contact centre on rates queries. We had 11 parks that were internationally recognised in the Green Flag Awards. These awards set the standard for management of outdoor recreation spaces globally, so this was a great achievement for our parks team. We also had 2,000 metres of track network upgraded, so we will be able to slowly start reopening some tracks in due course once they're upgraded. And then one of the highlights in September for Māori Language Week was the Hikoia Te Kōrero, which was a whole procession up Maunga Kia and a great day had by all there. So hopefully that is something that we will be able to continue going forwards. Back to the financials, we had direct revenue very strong. That was largely due to performance improvements in regulatory, and I will invite Craig Hobbs, our Director of Regulatory Services, to talk to that soon. Our expenditure was on budget. FTEs did increase, as Ross alluded to, and so just to talk a bit more about that, Auckland Council has been going through a process to rebalance FTEs, meaning that we will have more staff in the service customer-facing frontline areas while we seek to reduce back office staff. So for what this meant in the first quarter is we have more staff in areas like streetscape maintenance, graffiti management, customer services, parks and recreation, and we were reducing the numbers in finance. In terms of LTP performance measures, so we have 80 measures in total. We do not measure them all every quarter. Some are annual or 6 monthly measures, but of the 27 that we measured this quarter, 17 were met and 10 not met. A couple of highlights were in the areas of stormwater, and also in customer satisfaction for waste collection, which hit a record high of 72%. Regulatory, in terms of some of the targets not met, mainly are regulatory ones. Craig can talk a little bit more about that. There's some continuing focus on improvements in the resource consenting area, but we had some really good news as well in building consents. And even for targets that were not met, some quite significant improvements going in the right direction towards meeting those targets. So I will use that as a segue to hand over to Craig, who'll talk to you a little bit more about regulatory services performance, and then we're happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Members, tēnā koutou katoa. I can sit here quite proudly, I think, at this session and talk to the Regulatory Services Performance, Services Directorate Performance, and Nicola's covered some of the issues that we've, I guess, that we'll get into in more detail. We are working on an optimisation program within the Directorate at the moment. We've kicked that off about 3 months ago, and we will see some significant gains out of that, we believe, particularly through our consenting process. Having said that, the results and the improvements we've seen to date are a reflection of great work within the various groups and not of the optimisation program. So I think we've got the opportunity to build significantly on what we've already done. While Nicola identified that resource consents are still a bit of a challenge for us, we are seeing some improvement, and I take a lot of heart from that. We've been in steady decline or flatlining since the unitary plan came in terms of our performance against 20 statutory days and resource consents. Over the last 4 months, we've had month-on-month gains in terms of improvement of meeting that standard. So we're currently at 69% for October, which is up from the 64% September 2018. So small gains, but certainly on the right track. In terms of our financial performance, continues to be very, very strong. The net income is up there at 6.8 million at the end of September. Our net surplus at the end of October is 8.4 million. So again, looking very strong there. We're still getting extremely good results out of licensing and regulatory compliance, particularly some work in the dog control area or animal control. Our customer satisfaction levels for food and for alcohol are sitting at 84% and 85%, both respectively. So again, really pleased with that performance. And also just want to recognise in the back Ian McCormick, the General Manager of Building Consents, because Building Consents has been a real success story. We consented 14,634 new dwellings in the last 12 months. To put that in context, 10 years ago we were doing around 4,000 dwellings. So the growth in Auckland is significant. We have seen a bit of a drop-off in terms of total consents lodged in the last 12 months, but that's been offset by the complexity of those consents. So we're up around about 9% in terms of our residential 3, which is the high complex apartments, terraced houses and the like, which does demonstrate the unitary plan is doing what we expected it to do. In terms of 20 statutory day performance for building consents, September 2018 we were at 63% performance. September this year we're at 86%. So significant increases and very, very proud of that result. Our satisfaction levels have gone up 10%. We're at 56%. Still quite a bit of work to do there. So I'm certainly not acknowledging that we're there yet. We've got a long way to go, but it's on the right track. I think a couple of other performance highlights that I'll point out is that our new dwelling code of compliance issued and within 20 days is currently at 94%. 95% for this month, 94% for last month. And that's up 22%. Our CCCs are up 22% on the previous year. So yeah, very, very, very pleased, I guess, with where we're tracking. Still more work to do, but it's looking good.
You're going to cover noise?
Noise, yeah. So noise, we are still struggling in terms of our performance around customer satisfaction. It is a complex area. I shared with the chair yesterday a figure. I've just finished a research paper on noise. In Auckland, we have 1.7 million people. We get 60,000 noise complaints a year. New York City, with a population of 5 million, get 40,000. So I guess it just demonstrates our sensitivity to noise, perhaps a lack of tolerance as we grow as a city, changing of urban boundaries, more people living on top of each other, and it'll be interesting to see how we manage that. We have reduced our tolerance for noise, so we're now issuing 95% of a situation where we believe we are over excessive noise in an individual case. We're issuing an excessive noise direction, which is quite a significant increase on where we've been in the past. So we're trying to manage it through our compliance team, but yeah, be fair to say our customer satisfaction levels are still not where we'd like to be.
Well, thank you, Nicola and Craig. Now we've got questions from Councillor Newman, Councillor Henderson. Councillor, not yet? Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just around noise control, and you've kind of answered most of it, but in the report we have a disparity between the substantive feedback, which says actually it's going pretty well, versus the percentage of people that say they're actually satisfied as a data figure. So maybe could you explain that disparity?
Yeah, Councillor, I'm not sure I can totally. I think part of the challenge we have with noise control is visibility. So we use consultants or contractors most of the time to address our complaints. We use our own specialist in-house team when there are complex issues. But quite often a noise control officer will turn up to a complaint, will sit outside the property, will do an assessment based on a matrix and may determine there's no noise issue and they'll drive off. Or they may go in and take some action, but quite often that's not visible to the complainant. So that may be some explanation toward that metric.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question from the previous slide regarding the My Auckland stuff. Just wondering if we've actually registered the domain name, which it looks like it is free. If we're marketing ourselves as easier for residents to deal with, then a small step of doing that is just to log into My Auckland as a normal person would interpret that phrase and type it in. I think that might be a good idea.
I will take that away, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Just on noise, since it's one that we all deal with. Could you tell us what the top complaints are for noise?
It's generally social noise, so it's music, household noise, the likes. We do get so it's quite a high percentage of that, and then following that is industrial noise and the likes of lawn mowers and so on early in the morning, but that is quite a small percentage. So the majority is music and partying type noise.
So could you just talk me through the process if you get a noise complaint, say at 11 o'clock, to say there's been a party going on next door, I've got a small baby, what happens next?
Yeah, we work on a graduated response program, so quite often if there's been multiple call-outs, we'll go immediately. If we get one complaint, we tend to wait around about an hour to see if we get another complaint, which does upset some people, but that we just don't have the officers to manage every complaint. On that second complaint, we will attend the site. The officer will sit outside and won't use a meter machine. They'll do an assessment based on metrics. So they're trained up in terms of assessing the noise. There's a whole lot of variables that they consider. If they consider that variable to be over the excessive mark, they will then go in and talk to the offending property and see if they can get some action that way. Quite often they will re-attend to see whether the music's been turned down and turned back up again. If we don't get any action at that point, we can then issue an excessive noise direction. Our final step is to seize equipment, and that has to be done in conjunction with the police. We can't enter a property and take property without the police being in attendance. And that can be a challenge sometimes because Friday, Saturday nights, police are busy as well, so there can be quite a lag before we can get an opportunity to do that. I think something that's worth just advising the members on is that there's a 72-hour window under the Resource Management Act and the noise regulations where once we issue an excessive noise direction or warn someone around noise, that basically expires after 72 hours. It's not a cumulative type of process where we can start looking at a pattern of behaviour and then take action. But basically we start from scratch after 72 hours, which can be frustrating to our officers.
A supplementary, I have to ask this on fireworks. We get lots of calls throughout the year, but more especially in the 2 or 3 weeks before and during and after Guy Fawkes. Can you just talk about that, please?
Councillor, sorry, I have no information on the fireworks this year and the number of calls. I'm sorry, I can't give you that, but I can follow up and get that information to you.
Okay, Councillor. Councillor Martley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you for the report. I wanted to ask about noise control as well because that fills up my inbox, and also going out with you on the noise control patrol was really valuable because I did get to see what that challenge is in terms of enforcement with the police and also in terms of our recidivist noise polluters, and then that 72-hour kind of challenge. So what are we doing to address those challenges? And perhaps if we did that, then we could improve our customer satisfaction with our response to noise control.
Yes, it's certainly formed part of our conversations with the Ministry for the Environment around the RMA and noise regulations in terms of trying to influence some change in policy. What we do tend to do, and Councillor, as you identified, going out with that specialist team, we've got 15 specialist officers and we use them where we can, where we do get recidivist situations, and it's really trying to educate those individuals. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, as you'd appreciate. But it is a really complex issue, and to be honest, we don't have any simple answers. The reason I did that research paper was hoping it would give me some. It didn't. In fact, interestingly, in Europe, the majority of European countries, the local authorities or central government take no responsibility for social noise. If you have an issue with your neighbour, you resolve it. They don't get involved. So I found that quite interesting.
There we go. There's an idea. Or not. Another one? Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask a general question. I notice in this booklet we have a line for outsourced works and services, and it increases every year. But if we're increasing our FTEs in the regulatory space, then shouldn't our outsourced works figure go down?
Ideally, and it's certainly what we're aiming for. One of the challenges we do have is around finding qualified people, particularly in our building consents and resource consents issues. And we did flag, I think, in the report the challenge we're having with Kāinga taking staff at the moment, which is a real vexed issue for us. They are paying significantly above the market, and that is a challenge for us. We have been consistently over the last 3 years around about 60 people short in building consents and around about 30 in resource consents, and those people just aren't out there. It is an issue. So we are reliant on consultants, but certainly part of our strategy around our optimisation program is how we can convert those consultants into FTEs, see if we can bring them back into council.
Very good. Very
Well
good.
done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. I'm just trying to get a little bit more detail about, I think, the introductory comments, Nicola, to do with the staffing of the group FTEs and the council proportion of that. So they've gone up 193 is that overall, but you said, and this certainly meshes with some of the the anecdotal stories I hear where people are being made redundant essentially. So they reduced the numbers in finance. Do we have a number for the numbers of people that are losing their jobs, not just in finance but elsewhere? Because some of the anecdotal evidence is that there's quite some significant numbers of people going. So do we have that sort of detail so we get a sense of what's happening across the council as a whole in terms of where people are going from, other than just the finance that you mentioned?
Through the chair, in the period to the end of September, there was not a lot of redundancies made, but subsequently, I think we can look to report on that in the Q2 reporting. Yep.
Just a follow-up question to that. So when people go, are our employment contracts structured that there are redundancy payments, or is it just terminations essentially?
Through the chair, yes, there are redundancy clauses in our employment contracts. Yeah. There may be. It depends on the circumstances whether there may be other termination payments or not.
So in most instances where people are going, there are payments occurring.
Yes, unless they find another position within the organisation, then of course they wouldn't get redundancy.
Yeah. Right. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Newman.
I had some questions on the waste and the customer and community involvement strategic focus areas, if somebody can answer them. Start with waste first.
Just get Barry. Barry, do you want to come forward? Barry, there you are. Right, he's all ears. Councillor Newman.
Good morning, Barry. Not quite sure if you're able to answer them, but I'm sure that you'll get back to me if you can't. So in the report on page 46, we talk about the illegal dumping and enforcement. I want to know roughly how many cameras have we got allocated to surveillance to inform the issuance of infringement notices and prosecutions. So how many cameras have we got operating at the moment, and do you have a schedule of where they have been located? Not for the public, but just for me.
I'll do my best. I went, and the number may not be quite correct. I went out with the illegal dumping team a couple of weeks ago. My recollection is about 20, though I can confirm that. I do recall that because one was stolen when we went there by a member of the public. We do put them in locations where there are problem areas, and we do move those around.
Yeah, I would like to get that information because there are signs that get put up in my ward that states that surveillance camera technology may be applied here, but when I make inquiries, I discover that the cameras have never been used in those locations. So I am interested to know if maybe for the schedule as to where they've been located, maybe in the past 6 months or something, that would be useful. The second thing is that in the report, and this is in the public, we state that markets for recyclables status on track. And then we say identifying alternate markets for recyclables, developing alternative onshore solutions for recyclables. Is that a reasonable statement to make, given that it's pretty demonstrable that actually in terms of those offshore market destinations have completely exited? And so that we do have this burgeoning volume of waste, including recyclables, where there is no offshore processing location to take them. And that what we seem to be doing is trying to rapidly find an onshore processing solution, but we haven't yet identified what would be the cost of that, let alone the operating subsidy that would presumably apply. And yet we're putting in this report that we're on track.
So through the chair, at this point in time, we have markets for the main products we're talking about here are paper and then plastics. We have markets for paper, which, as I recall at the moment, is India, and plastics, I think, are going to Malaysia. Plastics are the more fraught one. We have our PET bottles now going to Visi in Australia, and I saw that last week. But this is an issue long term. It requires a national solution. We are working on that with the government. We are also talking to major players about what the future looks like, and in due course we can come back and report on that, but it is work in progress. Councillor, you're quite correct. This is a risk for us in terms of maintaining those markets offshore until we can develop some other way of processing it in country.
So we'll talk about that more in terms of the annual plan, but I'm not sure it's on track. My view is that the status is that in terms of this market, we're way off track. But anyway, with respect to the Resource Recovery Network, we state that we're on track. The description is establishing a network of 12 community recycling centres operating through the region in 2025, and that we state outlook 8 community recycling centres have been established, including a further 3 in Otara, Western Springs and Onehunga. Is there another site? Are we looking at anything more in South Auckland? Because that is where the problem is absolutely prevalent. But what progress are we making beyond the sites that we've identified?
So through the chair, South Auckland is a priority area for the team working on this. I can't give you the specifics about the sites that might be available in South Auckland, but I'm aware that is a priority for them.
Okay, we'll take that up offline with the staff beyond that, but I would really appreciate the schedule of locations for those cameras. I guess as well, the operating cost of that technology and the cost of the enforcement around that for the 3 prosecutions and for the infringements. Madam Chair, I had some questions with respect to customer and community investment. Is somebody able to answer that?
Who's the best person to do that, Nicola?
I may have to take the questions.
It might have to be you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. If you can't answer these questions,
Thanks,
I'm happy if you want to take that back. Thank you very much, Barry. Nicola, with... no, you won't be able to answer the renewals. The other question that I had in this space actually is one of the Ollies, the Aberdeen Local Board, Chamberlain Park. Now, I got an email the other day to say that the media statement that the decision around Chamberlain Park from the local board, I think, is going to be a different one. So at the moment, it's got a red dot. This is on page 48. Pending outcome of local board's decision on scope and next steps. So what's the timing for clarity as to where that local board will head? Because that's a pretty substantial cost around the redevelopment of that Chamberlain Park Golf Course. If that's not happening now, if that is not happening, if we're keeping 18 holes, then we need to know about that, and we need to get a rescope of the cost of that Ollie, because that's quite important in terms of the business case and settling some debates in the public. So are you able to answer in terms of timing and process for next steps?
Through the chair, I'm not, but I could ask John a few. Are you able to answer the questions on Chamberlain Park, John?
Come forward, John. Just while he is coming forward, Councillor, I know that there will be Ollie workshops in February, March, deep diving into that, but yeah, absolutely. John.
Yeah, through the chair, that project obviously been rejigged due to the decision of the local board, and the process is now going through to reset that project. It'll be an Ollie in a different form, but the board has a view of wanting to geographically split their Ollie between two visions they have, one on Chamberlain Park and one elsewhere. So that will come back to the committee after Christmas. I can't give you the timeline.
John, thank you for giving me some insight on that. So can I just get understanding of Ollie rules? If a local board's Ollie is deemed not to be necessarily deliverable, but they have a vision for a hybrid with presumably the budget, is that permitted? Because I've got another Ollie that I'd quite like to see recalibrated.
It's not run on an Oliver Twist process. Please, sir, could I have some more? But
can I have it differently?
Councillor Newman, Oliver, Daniel.
But in the context, we've got another local board, Mangere, where their Ollie just couldn't physically be delivered, and they're going through a process to rejig that. We've got some of the Auckland Transport Ollies that will require a significant revisit. So it's sort of a pragmatic horses for courses approach. That's what's been applied. There is no policy or process in writing. It's just to apply common sense as we move through. But one thing has been made clear to the local boards, that if it changes from what has been previously reported to F&P committee, the process both for funding shortfall and other is to come back for this committee to advise them of what their requirements will be.
Got a timing for that report back?
On which one? On Chamberlain?
If there is a need to report back on the change in scope.
It'll ORACI, which the chair is probably very familiar with, there is a funding shortfall there. That will need to come back here. That'll be through Auckland Transport early in the new year. The Mangere local board, that would be probably in the first quarter of next year. Chamberlain Park would be similar. Going through a process now through a workshop, and there are a couple other projects. For example, the FAO, we're going through a process now where there was an unsolicited approach, depending on how that pans out. So they're not running contemporaneously. They're going to be coming to you on an as-needed basis, spread throughout the year, basically.
I just have one more, actually, in the water quality program. Craig McElroy is here. Can he just step forward?
Thank you, John. Craig?
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Hi, Craig. Thank you. Craig, do you have any idea how much the capital works program for Takanini is forecast to cost? The amount of money that must be spent trying to drain that part of my ward must be absorbing much of your capital budget for the region at the moment.
So the total program cost, if you go back to you have to realise this project's made up of a number of components. Includes both the culvert, the tunnel and the new waterway. So at an aggregated level, the total cost of the whole program is circa $140 million. But a lot of that investment has occurred already, and over the next 2 to 3 years, we've got the balance of the works that relate to the conclusion of the channel project. This is all obviously was factored in as part of the last LTP, and it's also built into the way that things like DCs are being calculated, taking into account the change in DC policy around geographic areas.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cooper. You good? Okay. Councillor Walker.
A couple of questions. Just picking up on the issues that Councillor Newman was raising about waste, I share that. And just going back to the earlier comment I made about evidence and transparency, it would be very useful if we could indicate where the plastics are actually going overseas, because increasingly the evidence is that they're not always going where you think they're going, or there are substantial numbers of plastics that are negatively impacting on the environment, and that includes Malaysia. So I think, given the level of interest in this, I think we need to be much more transparent around that. So I'm just suggesting that, Madam Chair. The other question I've got also goes to the matter that Councillor Newman raised around ollies. Quite obviously, we've got a circumstance where we've got new councillors, new local boards, new people on local boards, and a number of ollies, and I don't propose to mention them, that are in difficult situations and obviously needing a reset. Is there a facility where local boards are re-looking at their ollies now with a view to the upcoming annual plan across the board, so that if there is a need to ditch an ollie, reset an ollie, and frankly I don't even like the word ollie and I don't even like the concept, but that's another issue altogether, but is it possible to re-look at them, and is that happening quickly?
Through the Chair, the new local boards are in the process of developing their plans for the next 3 years, and they're obviously subject to consultation processes and so forth, but that would provide an opportunity through the next LTP process to look at the OLLI program and potentially reset it.
I think my particular concern is around instances where additional money might be throwing at something that is frankly not going to go anywhere, when it might be possible to have a faster refresh.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be spending money on something that's not going to go anywhere, but I get your point, thank you. And we will, as I've said, just talking to Councillor Newman, there'll be a workshop on that at the beginning of the new year. All right? Right, with no other further questions. Oh, yes, I do. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm afraid this one's for Barry as well. So about the waste space, there's a lot going on there. Sorry, Barry, to get you back again. Maybe I could do the intro just while you're...
$10 to the Finance Department, Your Worship.
Just in terms of the strategic focus on page 46 and the work program there around construction and demolition, it was fantastic that the team won an award last week about community partnerships with the work that's being done to partner on deconstruction rather than demolition. And I just wanted the questions around the fact that one of the main projects I know that team has partnered on was the deconstruction of the Masonic Lodge in Salisbury Reserve, but that only happened because the local board contributed the budget and had to really push for it to happen, and it was just going to be business as usual and sending in the bulldozer. So I guess I had two parts to the question. One, is there sufficient budget for doing it as a deconstruction process, and is that work program going to be more focused on deconstruction and partnering rather than the demolition?
I can't speak specifically to that particular project. I just don't know the details. But C&D and how we handle C&D is a real focus area for the waste team. And we've got a program that we're putting in place there for that, around deconstruction, around use of materials. we're writing in waste minimisation into our construction projects, and this includes the big ones like City Rail Link, Wynyard Edge Alliance. So there is work happening in that space. It is a real focus area, and that makes up, C&D makes up about 40%, as I recall, 45% of waste to landfill, real target area. I can't answer that, just exactly where the fundings for them all come from. Some may be from local boards, some may be from the waste budget generally.
But you can come back to councillor on that.
Can
Right.
do.
Thank you. Right, no further questions? Any comment? Well, that. Great, thank you, councillor. I'll second it then. Oh. All those in favour, say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Item 11 is the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board delegation of approval. And we have Alistair. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. A very brief item. It may take me longer to talk through it than read it. The Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Act allows 9 organisations throughout Auckland to apply to the funding board for funding each year. The funding board puts out a draft annual funding plan which members of the public, including Auckland Council, are entitled to make a submission on. Due to the timing of that funding plan being put out for public consultation, we will not be able to come to this committee to get approval of the submission as we normally do. So this report is simply asking for a delegation to the chair and deputy chair of this committee to approve that submission.
Right, thank you. I bid not second that. Deputy Mayor, thank you. Any questions for Alistair? No? Councillor Fletcher.
I just put my hand up to move it.
Right. Maybe call. Thank you. Okay, then it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Look, there's no items of extraordinary business, so that brings us to the conclusion of our public meeting, and we will move into confidential to discuss the confidential item because it contains legal professional privilege and allows for negotiations. Do I have a seconder to go into confidential? Councillor Holland, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against. 5-minute break, please, while we clear the room, and then back for the confidential item. Thank you.